You won't believe what happens in today's story. It's one you definitely won't forget. If you love thrilling, eerie, and downright mind-blowing stories, then you're in the right place. My name's Charlie, and welcome to Charlie's Tales, where we bring you 2 spine-chilling stories every Wednesday and every Friday. So, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe, and while you're at it, throw that like button straight into an erupting volcano. Now, let's dive in. In the summer of 2017, Marcus Hansen took a break from his job at a software company in Seattle. At 31 years old, Marcus had been working for the same company for nearly 8 years, and the monotony of coding all day had worn on him. He needed to reconnect with nature, to escape the notifications, the artificial light, and the constant hum of the city. Marcus grew up in rural Montana, where camping and hiking were normal weekend activities. But since moving to Seattle for work, these outdoor excursions became rare. This time he wanted something immersive, a true wilderness experience. After researching options, he settled on a 10-day solo backpacking trip through the Olympic National Forest in Washington. Olympic National Forest is known for its diverse ecosystems, from temperate rainforests to alpine meadows. It's a hiker's paradise, but remote enough that you can go days without encountering another human. This was exactly what Marcus was looking for: complete solitude. He spent weeks preparing for the trip, planning his route through the backcountry, purchasing new gear, and making sure his emergency contacts knew his itinerary. Marcus wasn't reckless. He understood the dangers of going alone into remote wilderness. He'd taken wilderness first aid courses and carried a satellite phone for emergencies. By all accounts, he was as prepared as anyone could be. On the 4th of July, while most Americans gathered for barbecues and fireworks, Marcus set out on the first leg of his journey. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies with temperatures in the mid-70s. He started at the Dos Wallops River trailhead, planning to make a large loop through the eastern part of the park over the next 10 days. The first 3 days were exactly what Marcus had hoped for. He hiked between 8 and 12 miles each day, setting up camp near water sources as the sun began to set. He saw elk, marmots, and even caught a glimpse of a black bear in the distance. At night, he would sit by his small camp stove, cooking simple meals and writing in his journal by headlamp. The solitude was refreshing, and he felt his mind clearing with each passing day. On the 4th night, things began to change. Marcus set up camp near a small stream about 15 miles from the nearest trailhead. After dinner, as dusk settled over the forest, he noticed something unusual: a faint light moving between the trees about 100 yards from his campsite. He thought it might be another hiker with a headlamp, although he hadn't seen anyone else on the trail for days. He called out, "Marcus! Hello! Anyone there?" but received no response. The light lingered for a few minutes, then disappeared. Probably just some wildlife reflecting my fire, he reasoned, brushing off the uneasy feeling that had come over him. He added another log to his fire and focused on his book. But throughout the evening, Marcus couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made him jerk his head up, scanning the darkening forest. Around midnight, he finally zipped himself into his tent and tried to sleep, attributing his nervousness to too many horror movies as a teenager. He awoke before dawn to the sound of footsteps circling his tent. Not the 4-legged gait of an animal, but the deliberate steps of a human. Marcus lay perfectly still, his heart pounding so loudly it could be heard outside the thin nylon walls of his tent. The footsteps completed a full circle around his tent, then stopped directly in front of the entrance. Marcus held his breath. Seconds ticked by. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the footsteps receded into the forest. At first light, Marcus unzipped his tent and cautiously looked outside. The forest appeared normal, peaceful even, with morning mist hanging between the trees. But when he stepped out to retrieve his food bag from where he'd hung it to keep it safe from bears, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. His backpack, which he'd left leaning against a nearby tree, had been opened, and its contents had been carefully laid out on the ground in a perfect straight line, from largest item to smallest. Every piece of equipment had been removed and arranged: cooking pot first aid kit, spare clothes down to the smallest items like toothbrush and tiny bottle of biodegradable soap. Nothing was missing. Marcus repacked his belongings, his hands shaking badly. He dropped his water filter twice. This was no animal. Someone had been in his camp while he slept. Someone had touched his things. The logical choice was to abort the trip immediately and head back to civilization. But the nearest trailhead was a 2-day hike, and Marcus wasn't sure which direction was safest. Whoever had been in his camp might be watching the trail. Besides, he reasoned, maybe it was just another hiker playing a prank. Strange and invasive, but not necessarily dangerous. Marcus continued to his next planned campsite, bringing him closer to a ranger station. He broke camp in record time and hit the trail by 7:30. The day's hike was tense. Every few minutes, Marcus would stop and listen, convinced he could hear footsteps matching his pace just off the trail. Occasionally, he would call out, "Marcus, I know someone's there. This isn't funny." But his voice only echoed back from the dense forest. By late afternoon, he reached his planned campsite near a mountain lake. It was an exposed area with good visibility in all directions, a deliberate choice after the previous night's experience. He set up his tent and gathered extra firewood, planning to keep his fire going all night. As the sun set, Marcus heard a splash from the lake. Looking up, he expected to see a fish jumping or a duck landing. Instead, about 50 yards offshore, he saw what appeared to be a human head above the water, facing him, watching. When Marcus stood up for a better look, the figure sank below the surface. The lake's surface remained undisturbed. Marcus waited, scanning the water, but saw nothing. After 20 minutes of watching, he reluctantly returned to his campfire, but positioned himself where he could see both the lake and the forest. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night. Before dawn, he awoke to find his fire had died down to embers. As he reached for more firewood, his blood froze. Standing at the edge of his campsite, barely visible in the pre-dawn light, was a figure. The person was of average height and build, wearing what looked like standard hiking clothes, but their face was obscured by the hood of a rain jacket. They stood motionless, watching Marcus from about 20 feet away. "Marcus, who are you? What do you want?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with fear. The figure didn't respond or move. It just stood there, watching. Marcus reached for his trekking pole, the closest thing to a weapon he had, and stood up. Marcus threatened to call the Rangers on his satellite phone. "They'll send someone out here." At the mention of the satellite phone, the figure finally moved, taking a single step backward. "I have a GPS locator," Marcus continued, emboldened by the reaction. "People know exactly where I am in my planned route." Marcus didn't wait for the sun to rise. He packed his gear with trembling hands and set off toward the ranger station, which was about 11 miles away according to his map. He hiked at a frantic pace, repeatedly looking over his shoulder. About 3 hours into his journey, the trail descended into a dense section of old-growth forest, where massive trees blocked much of the sunlight. The path narrowed, hemmed in by thick undergrowth on both sides. It was in this stretch of trail that Marcus became certain he was being followed. The sensation of eyes on his back was overwhelming. Occasionally, he would hear a twig snap or leaves rustle just off the trail behind him. Each time he would spin around, but saw nothing. Once, he thought he caught a glimpse of movement about 50 yards back, but it was gone so quickly he couldn't be sure. By early afternoon, Marcus was nearly running, his heavy backpack bouncing painfully against his spine. His route to the ranger station required crossing a suspension bridge over a deep ravine. As he approached the bridge, a new fear gripped him. What if his stalker was waiting on the other side? The bridge swayed under his weight as he started across. Halfway over, dangling 100 feet above a rocky streambed, Marcus made the mistake of looking back. There, at the entrance to the bridge, stood the same hooded figure. Marcus broke into a run, his pack threatening to unbalance him. The bridge bounced beneath him. When he reached the other side, he glanced back. The figure started crossing the bridge. Fueled by adrenaline, Marcus ran as he'd never run before. The trail ascended steeply, and his lungs burned with exertion. He didn't stop until he physically couldn't continue, collapsing behind a fallen tree about a mile from the bridge. As he gasped for breath, he listened intently for any sound of pursuit. After several minutes of silence, Marcus cautiously peered over the log. The trail behind him was empty. He waited another 20 minutes, catching his breath and gathering his courage, before continuing toward the ranger station at a more sustainable pace. It was nearly 6 in the evening when the weathered wooden buildings of the ranger station finally came into view. "Someone's been following me," he gasped. "They went through my things. They watched me from the lake." The rangers, a man in his 50s named Bill, and a younger woman named Teresa, quickly sat Marcus down and gave him water while he recounted his experience. They exchanged glances as he described the hooded figure and the items laid out in a line. "Bill, "You're not the first," Bill finally said when Marcus had finished his story. "We've had 3 similar reports this summer already. Solo hikers being followed, camps being disturbed. We don't know. We've increased patrols in the backcountry, but the Olympic Forest covers nearly 1 million acres. It's impossible to monitor it all. The description is always similar," Bill added. "Average height and build, face always hidden, never speaks. Never actually hurts anyone physically, but there was a solo hiker who went missing 3 years ago. Alan Redford. Experienced backpacker, knew the area well. They found his campsite with all his gear laid out in a line from largest to smallest. Never found him, though." Marcus spent the night in the ranger station's bunkhouse. The rangers contacted the park police, who took his statement and promised to investigate. They offered to drive Marcus back to his car the next morning, an offer he gratefully accepted. As they were loading his gear into the ranger's truck, Teresa handed Marcus a card with her contact information. Teresa, VO. "If you remember anything else, or if you see that person again, call me directly." Marcus, VO. "You think I might see them again? Outside the park?" Marcus asked, a fresh wave of fear washing over him. "Probably not. One of our reporters, a woman followed for 3 days in the northern section, saw the same person 2 weeks later in a grocery store in Port Angeles, just watching her. When she approached them, they walked away and disappeared." On the drive back to his car, Marcus sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. The ranger, Bill, seemed reluctant to discuss the situation further, only saying that they took such reports very seriously and were working with local law enforcement. When they reached the parking lot where Marcus had left his car 10 days earlier, Bill did a quick sweep of the area before letting Marcus out of the truck. "Bill, VO. Lock your doors as soon as you get in," he advised. "Drive straight back to Seattle without stopping if you can." He froze, then spun around wildly, scanning the parking lot and the surrounding trees. Bill had already driven away, and there was no one else visible in the small clearing. With shaking hands, Marcus swept the pine cones off his windshield, unlocked his car, and practically dove inside, locking the doors immediately. The drive back to Seattle was a blur of paranoia. Every car that stayed behind him for more than a few minutes seemed suspicious. Every person at the one gas station where he was forced to stop seemed to be watching him too intently. When he finally reached his apartment building in Seattle, Marcus sat in his car for nearly 20 minutes, watching the street and the entrance to his building. Everything seemed normal. Just city people going about their business, no hooded figures lingering in doorways. That night, despite being back in the safety of his apartment with the doors double locked and chained, Marcus barely slept. Every noise from the street or neighboring apartments jolted him awake. Around 4 in the morning, he finally drifted into a deeper sleep, only to be awakened at 6 by a sound that stopped his heart, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard in his living room. Marcus lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, straining to hear any other sounds. After long minutes of silence, he finally gathered the courage to reach for his phone on the nightstand. He dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone was in his apartment. Police arrived within minutes. They did a thorough search of the one-bedroom apartment but found no signs of an intruder. All windows were locked from the inside, and the chain was still on the front door. The officer suggested it was probably just the building settling or a neighbor moving around. There on the table were Marcus's keys wallet, phone charger, and watch items he'd emptied from his pockets the night before. They were lined up in a perfect row, from largest to smallest. Marcus moved out of his apartment that same day. He stayed with friends for a week, then found a new place in a secure building with doormen and security cameras. He filed additional police reports, but without any evidence of who might be stalking him, there was little they could do except take a report. In the months that followed, Marcus changed many things about his life. He switched to a job that allowed him to work remotely, minimizing his time in public. He installed additional security in his new apartment. He never went hiking or camping alone again. For almost a year, there were no further incidents, no strange arrangements of his belongings, no glimpses of hooded figures watching from a distance. Marcus began to relax slightly, to tell himself that perhaps it was over, that whoever had followed him in the forest had moved on to other targets. On the anniversary of his Olympic forest trip, Marcus received a small package in the mail. There was no return address. His hands trembled as he opened it, already knowing what he would find inside. The package contained a single pine cone and a small piece of paper. On the paper, someone had written 7 words, "I'm still watching." Marcus filed another police report. but there was little they could do. The package had been mailed from Port Angeles near Olympic National Forest and contained no usable fingerprints or DNA evidence. To this day, Marcus remains vigilant. He rarely goes out alone, especially after dark. He varies his routines and keeps a careful eye on his surroundings. Sometimes in crowded places, grocery stores, coffee shops, movie theaters, he gets the overwhelming sensation of being watched. When he looks around, he never sees the hooded figure, but the feeling persists. Marcus has connected with two other hikers who reported similar experiences in Olympic National Forest. Together, they've created an online forum where people can share their stories of being stalked in wilderness areas. Surprisingly, they've collected dozens of accounts from across the country, reports of solo hikers being followed, their belongings arranged in strange patterns, unseen watchers circling their tents at night. Park rangers and police acknowledge these incidents but have no explanations. No one has been caught. The stalker, or stalkers, remain at large, shadows moving through the wilderness, watching, following, but never revealing themselves or their motives. As for Marcus, he hasn't set foot in a forest since that July trip in 2017. Marcus, VO. Some people are afraid of bears or wolves or getting lost, he says, but the most dangerous thing in the wilderness might be the people you never see coming. The ones who watch you from the trees, follow your every move, and let you know they could get to you anytime they want. His final warning to anyone planning a solo wilderness trip, Marcus, VO. Remember, just because you think you're alone in the forest, doesn't mean the forest thinks